Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and after Parliament was quietly told to do one as a result of the coronavirus epidemic, it has now returned to a new format after the Easter break. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Parliament is not going to return in quite the way that we used to, naturally. You can't be jamming hundreds of the highest paid people in the world, if you work it out based on salary to IQ ratio, into a small debating chamber. There will be a physical Parliament. It's not going to be all done remotely, but the Speaker will only allow a specific 50 MPs into the chamber. Hopefully their entry will also be managed. Not a lot of point in sitting 2 metres apart if they're going to cram themselves through the doors at the same time. It's very much like the daily press conferences at the government take place, although the different people seem to be on lecterns that are a good 6 feet apart. They all come through the same door at the same time. A little bit silly, or at least they did do. Other MPs will be allowed to follow remotely, and up to, I think it's 120 MPs will be allowed to take part remotely as well, asking questions and so on. Video links used to be able to engage remotely as well, which is all good. Now, when the crisis first hit the UK, it was right and proper for the government to use emergency powers in order to take swift action. That was fine. There wasn't an issue there. The whole pattern of life in the UK had to change, and it needed to change very quickly. There was no time to discuss it all in committee, given especially that we'd allowed the situation to worsen by pursuing this herd immunity insanity beforehand. But it is important that Parliament doesn't just stand aside and let the government have completely free rein, especially as they haven't exactly been doing themselves very much credit with the crisis over the past few months. Now, the Institute for Government, who often discuss various aspects of government in the UK, have noted that although the start of the crisis had to be actioned quickly, the end does not. The lockdown had to be implemented without any real notice. The Prime Minister announced it one day and it was in place the next. But ending it can be more considered. You don't have to say, right, we need to end it right now, we've got to end it immediately. It doesn't work like that. You can announce that you're going to end it with several days to go, or phase it out, whatever, or you announce a phase at a time. That's all fine. And what that means is that you can then have Parliament debate those measures. And the argument is absolutely that it be Parliament and not the government alone that should be deciding on what are the measures to ease and when. There should, as a result, be parliamentary debates, all subject to public scrutiny, as would normally be the case. After all, this sort of scrutiny even happened at times of war, so there's no reason at all not to do so in a peacetime crisis. Essentially, the Institute for Government is calling for the following 5 things. 1, that the government gets parliamentary approval for the lockdown regulations. It's important to note that Parliament did not approve any of the measures that are in place right now. Again, that was fine, emergency powers and all that. But now that they're in place, the government now has time, has no excuse not to get parliamentary approval. And of course it will, because, Boris Johnson's got a huge majority, no issue there. 2, ensure that Parliament has a role in regularly reviewing and renewing the lockdown regulations, because that's also important. If there comes a time when Parliament says, well, actually, you shouldn't be leaving it this early, this is too early, or, you should be leaving it earlier than you want to, Parliament should ultimately be deciding that. 3, that ministers make statements to MPs on any decisions taken in the reviews of the lockdown. 4, that they put primary legislation before Parliament for any areas of ministerial powers where there is at all doubt on these powers. So there's certain things that ministers are deciding at the moment that very senior judges have sort of suggested are not really legal. So where there is any doubt as to the legality of what ministers are currently doing, well, it would just be easier if you just pass legislation so that you remove that element of doubt rather than create a very messy situation for the future. And 5, subject ministers to the same levels of scrutiny that would be expected under the Civil Contingencies Act, rather than trying to use other legislation to avoid that scrutiny. We all know we've got a government. I suppose no government, being fair on any side, is really going to enjoy scrutiny, particularly in an emergency situation where they're under enough pressure. But at the same time, it is necessary. And we do have a government that is particularly shy of scrutiny as well, even under good conditions. Now, that list of requirements for the Institute of Government is not at all what is being proposed, and it's certainly not what is happening right now. So it is certainly not what we're immediately going to be getting. There aren't going to be any votes. Parliament is not going to be voting. There is no system to allow Parliament to vote at the moment. There is supposed to be consideration for remote electronic voting for some unspecified point in the future, because they haven't even decided how they're going to do it. As a little aside, I do wonder if some of these changes, as they evolve, might not have greater longevity. Long have MPs argued for modern and safer methods of voting. You know, the current situation is that you've got, in excess of 600 MPs potentially in the chamber. When it comes time to vote, they all scramble down the steps and out through narrow doors and into other doors, stand around to be counted, and then back again. And that can happen several times a night if it's really busy. And, there's obviously health and safety concerns there. But the problem is that traditionalists have shouted them down every time, and there's an awful lot of those dinosaurs. But if an effective system of parliamentary procedures develops whereby those who can't attend Parliament can do so remotely, then we might actually end up with a bit of progress here. Only in terms of procedures, I hasten to add, not in terms of actually modernising the democracy itself. You understand, a biblical plague isn't quite enough to create those sort of earth-shattering moments in British democracy. Frankly, they're only being allowed to even look at remote voting now by calling it strictly time limited. The traditionalists have got the idea that this is only going to be for this emergency, isn't it? Oh, yes. And we're going to go back as soon as things are back to normal. Oh, yes, of course. But if it works, and it works well, who knows? Anyway, Parliament will also only be sitting Tuesday to Thursday each week. Now, that's not going to be a huge difference to most people watching Parliament anyway, because generally speaking, although you did have parliamentary debates on Mondays and Fridays in the past, they tended to be for the less controversial stuff. You didn't really get the big powerhouses, in Parliament there attending. So the key stuff was always debated Tuesdays to Thursdays anyways. Those were the main days when news would be coming out. So, and because there's not going to be as much business going through Parliament, again, that's fine. At least for now. We'll have to see what happens when the new pattern is in full swing. Remember, this has only just happened right now, and I'll be interested to see what are the media reports on the various exchanges in Parliament. There won't, of course, be any of the usual blood and guts, fire and fury that generally accompanies major debates and Prime Minister's questions, but we should at least start to see ministers being questioned about their approach to important matters with the new opposition in place, because at the moment all we're getting is hand-picked journalists being allowed to ask ministers questions, and even when those questions are quite tough, the ministers are batting them away quite easily. I will be very interested to see what they do in the face of proper parliamentary scrutiny, if indeed that's what we get. But that's the situation at the moment. Hopefully that's caught you up to date. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.